Fear has a way of quietly settling into the human heart. It does not always arrive with noise or warning. Sometimes it comes in the silence of the night, when the mind begins to replay worries and unanswered questions. Sometimes it appears in the middle of a busy day, when a single thought reminds us of how fragile life can feel. Fear touches every human being. It does not discriminate by age, strength, faith, or success. Even the strongest hearts have known moments when fear felt heavier than hope. Yet fear was never meant to control the life God has given you. Fear draws its strength from uncertainty. It feeds on the unknown and grows louder when we try to face tomorrow alone. It tells us stories about what might go wrong, what we might lose, and who we might become if things fall apart. Fear speaks in the language of what if. What if the door never opens? What if the sickness returns? What if the provision runs out? What if I fail again? What if I am forgotten? These questions echo through the mind until the heart feels weak and restless. But there is a place where fear begins to lose its power. That place is the presence of God. When fear is carried into the presence of God through sincere prayer, something profound begins to happen. Prayer does not always change circumstances instantly, but it always changes the posture of the heart. It lifts the eyes from uncertainty and places them on the faithfulness of God. It reminds the soul that we are not standing alone in a world of chaos, but held securely by a God who reigns above every storm. Prayer is not a performance. It is not about eloquent words or perfect phrases. Prayer is the honest cry of a heart that knows it cannot carry the weight alone anymore. It is the quiet surrender that says, God, I don't understand, but I trust you. And when a heart reaches that place of surrender, fear begins to loosen its grip. Fear thrives when we believe we must figure everything out by ourselves. It grows stronger when we think the future depends entirely on our strength, our wisdom, or our control. But prayer shifts that burden. In prayer, we acknowledge that there is a God who sees what we cannot see, who knows what we do not know, and who works in ways far beyond our understanding. Prayer reminds us that the future is not resting on our shoulders. It is resting in God's hands. Many people believe that faith means never feeling afraid. But faith does not mean the absence of fear. Faith means choosing trust even when fear is present. It means bringing fear into the light instead of letting it hide in the shadows of the heart. When fear is exposed to the presence of God, it begins to shrink, because fear cannot survive where truth lies. The truth is that God has always been faithful. He has never failed to keep his promises. He has never abandoned those who seek him. The same God who guided people through deserts, storms, and impossible situations is the God who listens when you pray today. He is not distant. He is not distracted. He is not indifferent to your pain or your fear. He is near to the broken-hearted, attentive to the anxious, and gentle with those who are weary. Fear often tells us that God has forgotten us. Prayer reminds us that God is fully aware. Fear tells us that the situation is hopeless. Prayer reminds us that nothing is impossible with God. Fear tells us that we are weak. Prayer reminds us that God's strength is made perfect in weakness. When fear is brought into God's presence, it is confronted by his character, and God's character is faithful, unchanging, and trustworthy. He does not promise a life without trials, but he promises his presence in every trial. He does not promise that the road will always be easy, but he promises that he will walk every step with us. There is a deep peace that comes when the heart stops fighting and starts trusting. This peace does not come from understanding everything. It comes from knowing the one who understands everything. Prayer realigns the heart. It takes the focus off the storm and places it on the one who calms storms. It takes the weight off the mind and places it into God's care. Some fears are rooted in past pain. Memories of loss, failure, or betrayal can shape the way we see the future. Fear says, "It happened before, so it will happen again." But prayer invites God into those memories. It allows Him to heal what still hurts and restore what fear has damaged. In the presence of God, the past no longer defines the future. His grace does. Other fears are rooted in the future. Fear of the unknown can be paralyzing. We want certainty, clarity, and guarantees. But life rarely offers those things. Prayer does not always give us answers about tomorrow, but it gives us confidence in the one who holds tomorrow. It teaches the heart to rest, even when the path ahead is unclear. There is something powerful about kneeling before God. When we kneel, we are not admitting defeat. We are declaring trust. We are saying, "God, I acknowledge that you are greater than my fear." And when we rise from prayer, we rise with a different spirit. The fear may not disappear completely, but it no longer controls us. It no longer defines our decisions or robs us of peace. Fear wants to isolate us. It convinces us that no one understands, that we must face everything alone. Prayer reconnects us not only to God, but to the truth that we are deeply loved, and love is the greatest enemy of fear. Where love is present, fear begins to fade. God's love is not fragile. It does not waver with circumstances. It does not depend on our performance. It is constant, steady, and secure. When we pray, we are stepping into that love. We are allowing it to surround our fears, soften our hearts, and quiet our minds. There are moments when fear feels overwhelming, when prayer feels difficult, and words seem impossible to find. In those moments, even a whisper reaches God. Even a tear is understood. God does not require long speeches. He listens to the simplest cry of the heart, and sometimes the most powerful prayer is simply, "God, help me trust you." Trust grows in the presence of God. The more time the heart spends with Him, the less power fear has. Trust does not eliminate challenges, but it changes how we face them. Instead of panic, there is peace. Instead of despair, there is hope. Instead of fear, there is quiet confidence. Fear focuses on what could go wrong. Trust focuses on who God is. Trust says that even if the answer is delayed, God is still good. Even if the door remains closed, God still has a purpose. Even if the road is difficult, God's presence is enough. Prayer teaches the heart to trust, not because life is predictable, but because God is faithful. There are times when fear returns again and again. That does not mean prayer has failed. It means prayer must become a daily posture, not a one-time moment. Just as fear can revisit the heart, so must trust. Each time fear rises, it is an invitation to return to God's presence, to place the burden back into His hands. And every time we do, fear loses a little more of its power. The heart becomes steadier, the mind becomes clearer, the soul becomes stronger, not because we have mastered fear, but because we have learned where to take it. We have learned that fear does not need to be fought alone. It needs to be surrendered. There is freedom in surrender. Freedom from carrying what was never meant for us to carry. Freedom from the exhausting cycle of worry and anxiety. Freedom from the belief that everything depends on us. Prayer opens the door to that freedom by reminding us that God is at work, even when we cannot see it. When fear is brought into the presence of God, it is met with grace, grace to endure, grace to hope, grace to keep going when the path is uncertain, grace to trust when answers are incomplete, and slowly, quietly, the heart begins to change. What once caused panic now brings prayer. What once led to worry now leads to worship. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable because God is involved. Fear may still knock, but it no longer lives in the heart. The heart that prays learns to rest. It learns to wait. It learns to trust, and in that trust, fear loses its authority, it loses its voice, it loses its power. Because when fear is brought into the presence of God through sincere prayer, the heart is no longer focused on uncertainty. It is anchored in trust, trust in God's goodness, trust in God's timing, trust in God's unfailing faithfulness, and that trust changes everything. Prayer does not remove life's storms, but it anchors the soul in God's peace. That truth runs deeper than many realize, because most of us come to prayer hoping the storm will stop immediately. We pray for the waves to calm, for the wind to die down, for the dark clouds to move away, and sometimes God does exactly that. But often He does something far greater. He gives us peace in the middle of the storm, strength in the face of fear, and confidence that does not depend on circumstances. Prayer does not always change what is happening around us, but it always changes what is happening within us. Life is filled with storms of every kind. Some storms come suddenly, without warning. One phone call, one report, one unexpected loss, and everything changes. Other storms build slowly, day by day, as worries pile up, pressures increase, and hope feels distant. There are storms of illness, storms of financial hardship, storms of broken relationships, storms of fear about the future, storms of regret over the past. No one is exempt. The strongest among us, the most faithful, the most hopeful, all will face storms at some point in their lives. Fear often rises when storms appear. Fear tells us we are going to sink. Fear whispers that we will not survive this. Fear convinces us that God has forgotten us, or that we are facing this alone. Fear has a way of magnifying the waves until they seem taller than the sky. And if fear is left unchecked, it will rob us of peace, steal our joy, and paralyze our faith. But prayer anchors the soul. An anchor does not stop the storm. It does not calm the sea or silence the wind. But it keeps the ship from drifting, from being smashed against the rocks, from being carried away by forces stronger than itself. In the same way, prayer anchors the heart. It keeps us grounded when emotions are unstable. It holds us steady when everything around us feels out of control. It reminds us that even when the storm rages, we are not adrift. We are held. When we pray, we are acknowledging something powerful, that we are not self-sufficient. We are confessing that we need God. We are admitting that our strength is limited, our understanding is incomplete, and our control is fragile. Prayer is an act of surrender, and surrender is not weakness. Surrender is the doorway to peace. God never promised a life without storms, but He promised His presence in every storm. He promised that He would be with us in trouble, not that trouble would never come. And when we pray, we step into that promise. We place ourselves in His presence. We shift our focus from the size of the storm to the greatness of God. Fear thrives when we focus on what we cannot control. Peace grows when we trust the One who controls all things. Prayer replaces fear with courage, not because the danger disappears, but because God's presence becomes more real than the danger. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to trust God even when fear is loud. When you pray, you are saying, God, I am afraid, but I trust you more than I trust my fear. And that choice changes everything. There is a kind of peace that cannot be explained by logic. It does not make sense to the world. It shows up when it shouldn't, lasts when it shouldn't, and strengthens when weakness would be expected. That peace does not come from favorable circumstances. It comes from a heart anchored in God. Prayer opens the door to that peace. Some people believe prayer is only for emergencies, a last resort when all else fails. But prayer is not a backup plan. It is the lifeline. It is not something we turn to only when storms come. It is something that prepares us before the storm ever arrives. A heart trained in prayer is a heart that knows where to turn when fear rises. When storms hit, our natural instinct is to panic, to rush, to try to fix everything at once. But prayer invites us to pause, to be still, to remember who God is. In prayer, we are reminded that God is not surprised by our situation. He is not confused. He is not overwhelmed. He sees the end from the beginning, and He is working even when we cannot see it. Hope is born in prayer. Hope is not wishful thinking. It is not denial of reality. Hope is confidence rooted in God's character. When you pray, hope rises because you remember that God is faithful. You remember that He has carried you before. You remember that He has made a way where there seemed to be no way. You remember that His promises do not fail. Fear tells you this storm will last forever. Prayer reminds you that storms have seasons. Fear tells you that you are powerless. Prayer reminds you that God is powerful. Fear tells you that this is the end. Prayer reminds you that God is still writing the story. Prayer does not always give immediate answers, but it always gives reassurance. It may not explain why the storm came, but it reassures us that God is present in it. It may not show us the whole path, but it gives us light for the next step. And sometimes that is enough. Unwavering confidence in God's control is not built in moments of ease. It is forged in moments of struggle. Every time you choose to pray instead of panic, to trust instead of despair, to surrender instead of resist, your faith grows stronger. The anchor sinks deeper. The soul becomes steadier. There are people who look calm on the outside, but are drowning on the inside. Prayer brings honesty into the light. In prayer, you do not have to pretend to be strong. You can bring your doubts, your questions, your tears, your fears. God is not offended by your honesty. He invites it. And when you bring your brokenness to Him, He meets you with grace. Prayer teaches us that peace is not found in having all the answers, but in trusting the One who does. It teaches us that confidence does not come from knowing what will happen next, but from knowing who holds the future. It teaches us that fear does not get the final word. Storms have a way of revealing what we are anchored to. If our peace is anchored in circumstances, it will rise and fall with every change. If it is anchored in people, it will be shaken by disappointment. If it is anchored in success, it will crumble under failure. But when our peace is anchored in God, it remains steady, even when everything else is unstable. Prayer aligns the heart with that truth. There will be days when fear feels overwhelming, when courage feels distant, when hope feels fragile. On those days, prayer may feel difficult. Words may be hard to find, but prayer does not require eloquence. Sometimes it is a whispered cry. Sometimes it is silent tears. Sometimes it is simply sitting in God's presence with no words at all. And even then, God listens. Prayer reminds us that we are loved even in the storm, that we are seen even in the chaos, that we are held even when we feel like we are falling, and that knowledge brings peace deeper than any calm sea ever could. The storm may continue to rage, but the heart anchored in God will not be destroyed by it. Fear may shout, but prayer allows faith to speak louder. Doubt may question, but prayer reminds us of truth. Weakness may be felt, but prayer connects us to strength beyond ourselves. This is why prayer matters, not because it guarantees a trouble-free life, but because it guarantees God's presence in every season of life. It anchors the soul in peace, replaces fear with courage, fills the heart with hope, and builds a confidence that does not shake when circumstances do. And when the storm finally passes, and it will, you will not only have survived it, you will have been strengthened by it. You will look back and see that God was with you all along, holding you steady, teaching you to trust, and anchoring your soul in a peace that the storm could never take away.